So hi guys, it's Jonathan Graham here for Guitar Interactive Magazine. We are here with a very special guest, the big announcement here. We've got Vivian Campbell from Def Leppard, and you guys are back with a brand new record, 7 years in the making.
Hi, we're getting quicker. No, we're not, are we? No, that's bad. 7 years is a long time.
Well, when we last spoke, which was, I think, about 3 years ago, you know, like off camera, you did mention that there could be a new record coming. So the which you would expect from you guys, you know, because you're always working and doing things. But I'm assuming that this one has just taken that time, you know, to get right with making sure that it's as great a record as it is, which, you know, Diamond Star Hill is an incredible record, but also with the pandemic. Has it been all this time just putting this thing together?
Yeah, well, there was talk about doing something in spring of 2020 before, you know, we had our big US stadium tour for summer 2020. We had plans like the rest of the world for that year. And, you know, there was talk, oh, let's get together and go to Dublin and start the recording process. There were a few songs knocking around. And then obviously in March 2020, everyone's world got upended. So, at that point, you know, we knew we weren't going to go to Dublin and start recording. And Joe sent around an email and said, you know, it looks like maybe the tour is not going to happen. If the tour doesn't happen, we should just kind of set up at home and get ready to record a whole record. So that's what we did. And the songs came in thick and fast. You know, it was like they stacked up because nobody knew what was going to happen in this new pandemic era. You know, it's like there was no schedule to do it really, you know. So it was okay, here's a bunch of songs that need vocals and guitars, you know, work at your leisure. So I did. I worked at my leisure.
so when you say that, like working at because that's obviously when we thought that this thing was going to be, I'm talking about COVID, you know, would have been wrapping up much sooner than it did. It seemed to get extended. When you say sort of working at leisure, well, what is that for you? You know, like, is it just some ideas get sent across, you work a little bit, you send some other stuff back over, or is it you guys getting together? And
oh, no, we never got together once. No, we didn't even, in fact, we barely even spoke on the phone. It's all like emails, and there's this thing called Bounce Boss where, you know, you can send in different mixes of the track and you put comments and stuff. So, and you go back and revisit earlier mixes. So it was all done that way because we're all in different time zones. I'm living on the East Coast of America now. I'm the only one in that time zone. You know, Phil and Rick are still on the West Coast of America. You know, Joe's in Dublin, Sav's in Sheffield. And, you know, so we'd you know, in the middle of the night, somebody'd be working or somebody'd be sleeping, you know. Yeah. That's kind of how it went.
Is that the first time you've done a record like that?
It's the first time we've done a record in its entirety like that, yeah. You know, I mean, like there was no one time we were ever together in a studio at once. There were no Zoom calls involved. You know, it was all just you wake up and there's something new in the Dropbox and you download it. And you try and remember, this I'm talking for myself, you try and remember how to turn your computer on. You're going, yeah, that's it. And then you think that's a big accomplishment. I'm just such a Luddite with technology, you know. Right. So for me, a big part of this was trying to relearn technology, you know. It was a bit of a double-edged sword the way we made this record. It was really good insofar as there's no pressure to record. There's no time schedule. There's no one looking over your shoulder. And as a guitarist, you know, I've always felt a little edgy in the studio when I know there's other people around me and I'm trying to do a solo and I'm trying to create something. You know, it's different if I have something like really formulated and I go in there and it's just a matter of execution of getting it right. And getting the sounds and whatnot, but if you're trying to like come up with ideas, and I personally feel a lot of pressure if people are going, ooh, yeah, this should be done, you know, right. Ooh, what's for lunch, you know, and so you didn't have any of that, so I had time to do it, to record something, and then, you know, reflect and think that's, you know, that's pretty good, but I think I could do this little part better. I'm going to go, you know, take a walk and come back and do it again. And so as a result of that, I think, speaking just as a guitarist, I think some of the guitar solos that I did on the record are some of my best in relation to Def Leppard by far. And I think the same is true for Phil. The other side of the equation is I had to learn how to engineer it to get it into the box. And that was always a challenge for me. I get so frustrated with technology. I'd spend hours, and the signal would be too hot and it would be distorting, or it's not loud and it's not hot enough. And I'd be on the phone with Ronan, our engineer in Dublin, and saying, please talk me through this, tell me how this works. So, I've always been a Luddite with technology. So I've always relied on a grown up being in the room to help with that aspect of it. But I also appreciate them not being in the room, because then it opens me up more creatively, So that it actually harkens back to my days with Dio when I did guitar solos, because I'd have Angelo, our engineer at the time, come in and set up a couple of tracks, get the sound together, and then I'd tell, okay, run along, go away and play pinball or something, give me an hour in here. And I'd, just play, record, and I'd do a solo. And when I felt I had something good, I'd call them back in, so it's kind of an extension of that.
That is incredible, actually, to put that comparison, because, I think the thing is like, for someone like yourself who's played so many years in front of, millions of people at this point, you can deliver on the night like that, but I guess there's a difference between something committing to a record and something that's out there on the night, and then you get to do it the next night if you feel like there's a couple of bum notes or what have you. Do you find the sort of the animal of sort of doing this with the red light blinking is a whole different thing to performing live and
totally, yeah. There's always that tension when you when you see the red light on, it's like, okay, got to get this right. And of course, in this day and age with technology being what it is, you don't have to get it right. You don't even have to get it right once, you can multiple tracks and send it to a grown-up to make them put a composite together, and stuff. Audio can be massaged and manipulated in so many ways and so easily by people who are much more technically competent than me, There is something to be said for the old school way of recording. I'm actually thinking back now that you mentioned that to the last time I ever recorded on 2-inch tape.
Right.
And it was a one-off blues thing that I did maybe about 10 years ago. And, I'd gotten so comfortable working with Pro Tools, and you could do multiple playlists of a solo or whatever, and then just pick the best one. And, this is like, no, there's one track. You gotta get this right. No, fortunately, it was a blues thing, so it was a lot more relaxed, as opposed to a Def Leppard record.
Yeah. But, do you ever find that, like, for yourself, that it can sometimes be that first take that's the one?
Here's the problem. That's a good point, Jonathan, because I have had a mindset for most of my career until rather recently. Actually, most of my career I've gone through it not planning guitar solos when I go to record them, and I realize that that's not always the best approach.
Right.
The reason that happened was because the first solo that I ever did on the Holy Diver album, which was the first album I ever recorded, the first solo I did was Rainbow in the Dark, and the solo that's on the record was the first take.
Wow.
And I didn't prepare it. I'd been playing guitar all day, and I mean like playing all day, like from early in the day, because I was very nervous about doing it. And I knew the song was in A minor, so I was playing in A minor, getting all my A minor licks in all day, playing A minor all day. And then when it was time to go in and record it, we spent about 20 minutes getting the guitar sound together. And, Ronnie and Angelo were in the control room up behind me. And I had my back to them because, again, like I say, it was that thing. If I see people in my peripheral vision when I'm doing stuff like that, it can wig me out a little bit. So and I was a kid at the time. I was 20 years old. And okay, let's take one. And so we did the first take, and that was Rainbow in the Dark and the soloist on the record. And Ronnie went, "Wow!" He said, "That was brilliant. Do you want to try another?" And I said, I didn't really want to try another. I thought, what was wrong with that one? Because that was my mentality. Was it really that bad?
Yeah.
So, and I said, okay, sure, Ronnie. So, and then we played another one, and then I'm starting to think about it, and I'm going, oh, I can't start there because I did that the last time. So it became mental.
Yeah.
And, I did one, and it wasn't anywhere near as good. And so after that, Ronnie said, you know what, let's just keep the first one. That was great,
It's getting out of your own head,
Exactly that, yeah.
Yeah, being too busy doing it to actually think, like, wait, what am I doing, because you put in all the work beforehand,
But it does make more sense. The point is, like, nowadays, even at home, before I go to record, like on this record, on Diamond Star Halos, go to do a guitar solo, I work something out first.
Yeah.
I kind of frame it out. I mean, it changes as I go. Once I start playing, I think, oh, that's good, but it's close, but it's not quite right yet.
You've got something that you want to say.
You got a roadmap.
And then you can sort of expand on it.
Don't be too good. Don't be too musical. Like I've seen guitar players play. Like guys who can play on a really high technical level. They have the alternate picking thing down pat and just like effortless. And that's kind of how it comes across. When I've watched a lot of guitar players of that caliber. I don't want to name any names, but I mean guys who are like really, really good. And I find that when I watch them, I'm watching their face to see what's happening, and I don't see anything happening. It's like it's so mindless for them because they've reached a level of technical ability to which I always strived but never got there, and it's just too effortless for them to play. Whereas for me, I have a few little things that I can do that kind of sound impressive and fast, but I can't shoot my load from the get-go, you know what I mean? I got to kind of get there. Plus, I grew up with Rory Gallagher. I'm a blues-influenced guitar player, so there's a lot of bending. It's not just all about hitting the notes, it's bending up to a lot of notes, a lot of heavy vibrato and stuff, and a lot of palm muting too. My approach to the guitar has always been physically aggressive in that way, and that's what's held me back from being able to play like these guys that can just rip off 64th notes cleanly, I'm too physically invested in the instrument to play like that. So there's always going to be that. Plus there's always, the influences like when I going back to working with Ronnie again, I mean, he did instill a lot of that into me, that a solo needs to tell a story, that it needs to be a journey within the song, that it can't just be a lot of notes. Because at the time, as a 20-year-old guitar player making my first album in LA, and just being super excited, I just wanted to get all the notes in that I could. And Ronnie's like, whoa, 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 you know what I mean? So, I remember Ronnie even explaining to me once, about being backstage and listening to Ritchie Blackmore, and says, Ritchie used to do this guitar solo, and he said, like, one of my favorite parts in Ritchie's solo spot, he said, was when Ritchie, playing a Strat with the 3-way switch, not even with a 5-way switch, he said when Ritchie would go clunk, and you just hear this clunk, going through like a big arena, and it totally conjured an image to me. I mean, that was a standalone guitar thing that Ritchie was doing, but it's dynamics, it's up and down, it's up and down. You can't start at 100 miles an hour.
Yeah.
You got to kind of build up to things and tell a story in that way. So, yeah. Yeah. That was a very long-winded answer. Sorry about that, John. Sorry, everyone.
No, everyone's
make a cup of tea.
Everyone's hanging on to it. That's why they want to know the secrets, and it's incredible to hear you go through the process like that. I mean, to talk about Diamond Star Halos and your contribution to it. What were you using gear-wise for this record?
It's all digital,
right?
I didn't put a mic up anywhere because, again, I'm not an engineer.
Yeah.
I used Guitar Rig, which I'd never used before.
Wow.
Well, first of all, I mean, just to backtrack a little bit, getting into the record, I don't have a home studio. I've got ideas on my iPhone. I used to have a home studio. The last time I ran it was early 2009. And long story short, but I was living in LA. I got divorced, and that was around the time my ex-wife and I separated. So I left my home at the time and my home studio. And my studio was set up as a Pro Tools setup, and had a patch bay and different stations where I could set up to record acoustic guitar or electric guitar or a little vocal booth and stuff. So it was set up for me in a way where I could formulate, I could develop my ideas.
Yeah.
And I got pretty good at it for a while. I was really into the technology then and trying to learn it. But, so I ended up getting divorced. The studio got packed into boxes. All that stuff is still in boxes since 2009. I mean, I got boxes just everywhere. So I've never gotten into having a home studio since. And, when we started making this record, I'm thinking, shit, how am I going to do this? So I called Phil and I said, what are you using? He said, well, I'm using Logic. And he said, oh, this is really easy. It's really easy. He says, so I went and downloaded Logic and I opened it up and I'm thinking, doesn't look easy to me. It's like, where do you start with this? And I bought an Apollo Twin. That's a little interface. Sure. And, again, I'm on the phone to Ronan. How do I set this up? How does this work? And so somehow I just kind of got through it. And Ronan would send me sessions in Logic. I'd, pull it out of the Dropbox, copy it over. I'd open it and he would have a vocal channel already set up for me with a compressor and whatnot. So I didn't even have to do any of that. So all I had to do was get a good level in from my mic. I got a Neumann 87 at home. Oh, well. Yes, obviously a quality mic. Yeah. Get that in there, and the vocals were the first thing I did. So I put in like Def Leppard, of course, there was a lot of vocals. So that got me at least a little bit more comfortable with the software. And then it was time to start doing guitars. So I got Guitar Rig, and there's a lot going on in there. It's a lot of stuff. It's great. There's a lot of choices, but I didn't get into editing anything really. I'd get a sound, I'd go through, scroll through, and find something that I would think, okay, that's comfortable for me. I could kind of work within that preset. And then, I'd get into the amp and I'd change the settings on the amp a little bit. Not a lot, but just enough to where it was comfortable for me to play with. And then I'd do guitar parts and I'd send them to Ronan. I also use the Angle plugin because I'm using Angle with Last in Line, my side band. Of course. And I actually say that most of the solos I did were probably with the Angle plugin. The Guitar Rig stuff were some very specific ones, and for all the rhythm guitars I did. And anyway, I'd do solo or whatever, or a couple of passes. I'd send it to Ronan. I'd also send him, with everything I did, I'd print the sound that I used. I'd send him those tracks. I'd also send him the plinky sound, so he could reamp it if he wanted
Interesting,
to.
okay, yeah.
No,
yeah.
I don't know if he ever did that, or maybe he did.
It sounds fantastic. I mean, I would never be able to. Not that these days, it's like digital's not some dirty word anyway. But like, did you find for a guy who sort of relatively new to that digital sort of Guitar Rig world, did you find any issues with the sort of responsiveness or the tones that you were finding?
No, there was no latency or anything. That was my biggest fear about it, that there was going to be that like nanosecond of latency that would really be off-putting, but there wasn't. I mean, it was pretty seamless, and like I said, there's such a variety of sounds, and digital technology has come so far. With Leppard, we use those fractal things. Yeah. And I talk about not knowing how shit works. It's like I look at that and I go, okay, like can somebody turn this thing on? I've probably told you this before. Like when it comes to guitar technology in this day and age, my responsibility ends at the jack plate. Yeah. It's like when it leaves the guitar, it's somebody else's gig.
But that's amazing though, because this is the thing, so many, as you'll know, so many guitarists out there and people watching right now, that fans of the mag and fans of yourself, they're obsessed with the all these tiny little bits. I'll need to change this. Forget about the woods. It's like, I've not got the right battery in my pedals. You know what I mean? And it kills it for them. So the idea for you that you just look, I can just focus on the guitar. I've got that in my hands. What's coming out the other end? That's up to you guys to make sure that the front of house and all that are hearing it. But it never gets in the way. You never get any. Do you never find you ever get any sort of sounds at a show and you're like, that's not getting the right vibe for me?
Well, here's the thing, Jonathan. When we play with Def Leppard, we all do the in-ear things, which are great for the vocals because it really helps you find your center of pitch much easier. It's great for the balance, playing on a big stage. You can wander around. It doesn't change. You can hear everything the way you want to hear it. The one thing it's never been great for is guitar sounds, in my opinion, because it always sounds small compared to what you hear coming out of a 412 cab or something. You're just not moving that much air. It doesn't have that
Especially going back to the Ronnie with
exactly.
that comment,
yes,
you know, about Richie Blackmore. You're listening for that, and you're like, where is that sound?
It's got none of that. So it's, you know, I've learned to accept that, to make that compromise, to have a guitar sound in my ear that's not as inspiring as I know it could be, and not as good as I know it's going to be out front.
Yeah.
You know, but just to kind of learn to play with it. So that's how I get around that. You know, I'd always much rather play, like when I do Last in Line shows, I don't do in-ears. I get wedge monitors and I got 2 412s loud as fuck behind me.
Yeah.
You know, I mean, it's probably not good for my ears, but you know, it's an old school kind of band, and with Def Leppard, it's very, very different. You know.
Yeah.
So.
What's going on with Last in Line? We're going to see some new stuff?
We did our first 2 records with Frontiers. We're working on the 3rd album. All 12 backing tracks are done. And I've done, well, we did it. We're now with Ear Music, which is a German label, so it'll be coming out in a new label. Now, as to when it comes out, I don't know. I mean, it's, you know, everything got off track. We started that record in January of 2020. We went into a studio in LA. We cut the first 6 tracks. And then before we got a chance to take it to the next level and start doing vocals and guitar solos and stuff, then COVID hit and we're back at home. So the way we work in Last in Line, though, is not like Def Leppard. I mean, we got to cut the tracks live. If nothing else, we have to be in the room making eye contact with each other, you know, when we're cutting guitar, bass, and drums. And so it took us a while before we were able to do that. But a couple of months ago, we got together in Las Vegas and we cut the remaining 6 tracks. So we got all the tracks. Now, I've already done guitar solos on the first 6 that we had done early in 2020. And I did that at home. I used the Angle plug-in for that because, so, you know, once I got familiar with the technology a bit for the Leppard record, I was able to do it. And again, it's a good way to play creatively because I didn't have that pressure. You know, I was able to come up with I think what are some very, very interesting guitar solos. So that's undoubtedly how I'll do the remaining 6 songs as well. And then Andy's going to do most of his vocals at home and whatnot. But so I don't know. I mean, at this stage, I got to think it's probably going to be early next year, at least before this record gets out, you know. Yeah. Plus, I got, you know, this summer's going to be really busy with. Of
course, yeah. You got the big new release. What I don't know, because we're what day are we Wednesday? I'm losing track
Wednesday,
already.
yeah.
Right. So Monday, I found out about the record. Got to hear it yesterday for the first time. You know, cramming in as many listens as I could because man, it is a great record. But what I don't know is I don't know when it's dropping.
Somebody told me, but I forgot. I got a head like a sieve, I swear to God. So soon, like, what are we, this is March? Yeah. Maybe it's this month, maybe it's May, March or May, it's one of those 2.
Yeah, and then of course...
Ask a grown-up.
Yeah, and then of course you're going to be touring this record, of course.
Yeah.
You got a lot
well, finally the big summer tour is going to happen this summer. That'll be great, you know, and we're going to be really busy the next few years. I think everyone feels like we got to make up for these years that where nothing happened, you know. Yeah. 2020, 2021. So, yeah.
And you're gonna be out on the road with Motley Crue, yeah.
Yeah, Motley Crue, Poison, and Joan Jett. Yeah, traveling circus.
Any of these bands you toured with in the past?
All of them actually. Yeah, we played with Joan Jett maybe about 12 years ago or so. She did an American tour with us, and she was great to work with. We really like her. Poison, we've actually toured with at least twice in the US. Yeah. And Motley Crue, the only time we played with them was actually over here, UK tour in 2012.
Yeah. Yeah, you kind of feel like with Poison and Motley Crue, like that's just a fight waiting to happen.
We'll see.
But I won't get you to comment on that. But one thing I will say is, obviously, you guys, you're talking about all that different sort of communication. You know, you didn't really get in the room together. It was, or even on Zoom calls. But you guys get along famously, of course, which we know. You know, what for you is like the key to you guys just having a great relationship? Because like so many of the bands that you think of, you know, they'll have these sort of internal conflicts, split up, get back together.
I think the bottom line is we all know that it's not about any of us. It's always about the music, you know, and I think Def Leppard's always had that sort of mentality. you know, that we are all doing what we do in service of the music, you know. And, you know, as a guitar player, it was always clear, you know, even before I joined the band, I kind of knew that, you know, Def Leppard were not known for 32 bar guitar solos. You know, it was always a short, concise guitar solo that was in service of the song. And, you know, that's kind of how we roll. It's just a very professional band, you know.
Yeah.
It's, you know, we've all been through the 80s and whatnot and survived all of that. You know, all the excessive stuff happened way back then. And now it's just a very grown up professional band. You know, it's annoyingly professional, you know. It's like,
and when are we going to get to see you play in the UK again?
I would think next year, you know, and there's been talk. I mean, before COVID hit, when we'd first announced the stadium tour in early 2020, and it went on sale, it's a Live Nation package, and you know, the shows sold out, like multiple sellouts really quickly. And so Live Nation started talking about maybe looking about bringing that whole package over here, like over to Europe, bring it to Japan, whatever. So I got to think that's probably still a possibility, you know. And if not a possibility, then I know for sure we'll be here one way or the other.
Look, Viv, absolute pleasure to chat once
Thanks,
again.
Jonathan.
And
Good
we'll
to
see you
you
soon.
again.